Today, we're going to be looking at measuring using a micrometer. Now, first of all, if we take a look at our micrometer here, we will notice that this micrometer is going to measure from 0 to 1 inch. And so what we need to do is to figure out all these cryptic little markings here and how that might tell us how to measure anything between 0 and 1 inch with a precision of 1/1000th of an inch. So let's take a look at some of these markings. Now, first of all, I've opened the drum all the way up so that we can see here all of these markings. And of course, where we have a 0, and then here we have a 0. This 0 here is telling us that that is 1.000 inch. Okay, that's exactly 1 inch when we're at that point. And then along the way then we have these other little marks. So let's zoom those up so that we can see those even better. And so we can see here that there are 10 of these little marks. So the numbers then that say 1, 2, 3, 4 are actually telling us tenths of an inch. So if we look at our sheet of paper here where we've enlarged that quite a lot, let's talk about just those numbers for a second. So between the 0 and the 1 on the micrometer, we're going to notice here that this 1 that they have is really 1/10th of an inch. So oftentimes we have to kind of understand what the numbers say. They don't always say exactly what they mean, so we have to understand some of that. So if this is 1/10th of an inch, then this middle mark must be half of 1/10th, and so that must be 5/100ths. Okay, so that must be 0.05 of an inch. Or if we want to think about this in thousandths, this is going to be 50 thousandths. And likewise, the 1/10th of an inch would be 100 thousandths of an inch. Now this space here marking the halfway point between the 0 and the 50 thousandths then has to be half of 50 or 25. And so this mark must be 25 thousandths, and likewise this must be 75 thousandths. Okay, and notice that those marks in that same scheme of things are going to be repeated all the way across the micrometer scale. So let's look at some of those. And once again, I'll zoom that up for you to see that. And so here then, we're going to have the 1/10th, but then this would be 2/10ths, or 200 thousandths, 3/10ths, 4/10ths, and so on. So in the marks in between the 2 and the 3, those would be all 200 thousandths. So the middle mark would be 250 thousandths. The first mark would be 225 thousandths, and so on up. Now, as we look then at the dial here at the end, notice that we can turn that, and when that's sitting right on the 0, then the edge of the drum is right on that mark. So right now we're set at exactly the 1 inch point. And notice then around this drum we have numbers that go all the way up to 25. So when that is setting on 0, it's also reading 25. So, and these little tiny marks then, each of those would be 1/1000th of an inch when we read those on the drum. So let's go back to the, let's go ahead and close the micrometer, and let's begin to take some measurements and then make readings from that. Okay, so we're going to measure the thickness of this little plastic block. And so first of all, we're going to put the block in the jaws of the micrometer, and then we're going to snug down the drum. Now be very careful here, because your micrometer, we don't want to use it as a C-clamp and actually crank this down too much, because if we do, we can actually spring or damage the micrometer itself. We don't want to do that. We want to get the item in the jaws, but we don't want to clamp it in there too tightly. In fact, we know that it's about right when the item will slide just a little bit, so you'll feel some friction. You'll feel some friction when you try to pull the object out. It can't be sloppy in there. It can't be too loose, but at the same time, we don't want it clamped too tightly either. And so what we have to do is kind of feel for that. Modern micrometers and calipers then have direct readouts from a screen that read this in thousandth, but we're going to have to then read our micrometer carefully in order to get the thickness of this block. So let's first of all take a look, get that in there, and then we'll take it out and we'll read this answer then in thousandths of an inch. Now, first thing to notice, zoom this up a little bit more for you, is that we see here the item is immediately somewhere between 1 and 2/10, or we could say somewhere between 100 and 200 thousandths. And part of these numbers here are blocked, so we're going to have to be a little bit careful what we read here so as not to mess this up. So let's go in here and let's unscrew our drum a little bit more. And remember that when we're on the 0 here, we are reading exactly 0.2 or 200 thousandths. And so remember that your drum then, as we turn it down, is going to read in thousandths from the previous mark. Now, once again, the mark that came before the 2 is going to be 0.175, because as you recall, these marks then are going to be in these multiples of 25 thousandths. And so since we're between the 1 and the 2, this nearest mark is going to be 175 thousandths. And then notice that we're going to go 15 thousandths. If we look at our drum here, we can see maybe 15 and a half. Okay, so 15 for sure, and then maybe that last mark is a bit of a guess, but for sure we can say that this is going to be 15 thousandths more than the 75 thousandths. So we can do a little math here and see that we're going to have the 175 thousandths plus 15 thousandths, or 0.190. In other words, this is going to be 190 thousandths and maybe just a little bit more. Okay, we can see here that it might be just a little bit more than that, but to the nearest thousandth, we will say that the thickness of our block, 0.190, or 190 thousandths of an inch.